1, as our trainers get started, I don't see why Paul would try and avoid setting up Trick Room here. Yes, it's true that there's a lot of opportunities for Shilian to mitigate the amount of damage that Calyrex Ice Rider will do once it is on the field, as we do see it led alongside of that Pelipper for Paul against the Grimmsnarl and the Incineroar for Shilian. So you want to have that speed control regardless, and then you just want to have enough time within that Trick Room to deal damage through the damage mitigation. Most likely the Reflect here, potentially a Will-O-Wisp as well, but I don't think you want to lock in your Fire-type Terastallization when you're expecting a later Kyogre in the game.
Actually, just the Thunder Wave coming out from the Grimmsnarl onto the Pelipper. So Pelipper will be paralyzed, will be slower than the Incineroar, so not able to pick up a KO with the Weather Ball. Instead, Shilian is able to get the Will-O-Wisp off onto Calyrex and gets the paralysis to boot. Paul has not been able to do anything this turn. A little bit of damage coming out from that Glacial Lance, but because Paul tried to preserve the Terastallization, is affected by that burn, and you don't even have to set up the screens.
No.
That did no damage to either of those Pokemon.
No, and I think it's very smart to prioritize lowering the Pelipper's speed and then trying to get the burn to connect, then you go for the Reflect.
Well, this is the saddest Calyrex.
It is the saddest Calyrex indeed, and while it is unfortunate that that turn did not go in Paul's favor, I think that you just have to try and find some damage here, and you have to assume this parting shot will switch into a Pokemon like the Kyogre, who's going to be so happy to enter the field with the Reflect, with the burn, and being able to resist a potential Weather Ball here as well.
All right, well, Hurricane comes out from the Pelipper, dealing a little bit of damage back to the Grimmsnarl after the parting shot. Another Glacial Lance connects onto Grimmsnarl and the Kyogre, and look at how little damage that Kyogre took. Of course, with the Reflect and the burn, it is happily sitting at just under full health, and there is nothing stopping Shilian from also being able to put up the light screen this turn or save Grimmsnarl in case you need to reset screens later.
I think saving the screens for later is smart because we don't necessarily know which Pokemon that Paul has in the back, and you know, you can just stack another damage reduction on top of that. Pelipper is able to hold on thanks to the Focus Sash from that Thunder, but I think more importantly here, we should take a moment to review some Kyogre damage calculations because...
Ooh.
Okay, well maybe talk about the confusion first.
Yeah, well, the confusion is the one thing that Paul has going for him in this game so far. Yeah, that was a super effective attack onto that Wo-Chien, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the confusion onto Kyogre now, making it slowing down Shiliang's offense. And any turn that Kyogre isn't able to deal damage is going to be really big for Shilian, as it is the only Pokemon that we've seen with significant offense so far.
Yeah, so there is a bit of a guessing game going on here between these two players. So Wide Guard on Pelipper will stop both the Water Spout and the Origin Pulse from Shiliang's Kyogre. But realistically speaking here, Kyogre has no motivation to go for those spread moves until this Pelipper has been removed from the field. Because in typical situations, Water Spout will still deal more damage than Origin Pulse as long as Kyogre is over about 50 to 60% of its health. So we do see Shilian try to sneak in a Wide Guard there. Unfortunately, does not get the damage to connect, but I think more importantly with the Leech Seed now on top of the burn on this Calyrex Ice Rider, there's really not much Paul can do. And rather than try and switch in a Pokemon to catch a potential additional Leech Seed or maybe even a Thunder, Ice Beam, Water Spout, or Origin Pulse on that switch, I think you just have to wait for one of your two Pokemon to be KO'd so that you can send in something to hopefully be at full damage. And again, looking at Paul's team, you really have to hope it's that Raging Bolt in the back, as you want a strong special attacker to make up for the fact that there's just so much damage mitigation against those physical attackers right now. And Pollen Puff to heal as well. Yeah, Shilian just has so much health on the board.
Yeah, there is damage mitigation, and then there is, oh, you dealt some damage to me? Don't worry about it. I have Pollen Puff and Leech Seed. Now, Kyogre did waste a turn there, hit itself in its own confusion, which means that this Pelipper has been able to get the helping hand onto the Calyrex to boost the damage of that Glacial Lance just a little bit. And every little piece of damage will count, As you say, Paul is likely trying to stall out as long as possible, not give away free damage to Shilian, and instead try to get a little bit of chip and maybe wait for those screens to reset, that reflect at least.
Yeah, and the fact that rain ran out as well does sort of force Shilian to consider a switch moving forwards. Like, if you're Paul, you don't switch out your Pelipper at 1 HP, really in any situation, especially given that the rain was mostly to reduce any fire-type damage coming through for the Calyrex Ice Rider.
Water Spout finally connects. No wide guard coming out instead. Pelipper will go down. The Water Spout not as powerful because the rain has ended, but still picks up the KO. Easy to do that on 1 hit point. Get a little bit of damage to the Calyrex itself. There is another Glacial Lance just chipping away at the Kyogre, but Shilian, the Leftovers recovery and the Leech Seed recovery, keeping that Wo-Chien extremely healthy and just walling Paul's team right now.
I'm very curious to see what Pokemon Paul has in the back of his party, as we actually get the double KO thanks to the damage from the Leech Seed there and the burn. Kyogre is just sitting very, very healthy right now. Will be significantly more threatened by the presence of Raging Bolt on Paul's side of the field, but seeing that his final Pokemon is going to be that Urshifu Rapid Strike style, Paul is left with a very difficult choice here. He has to pick one move on that Urshifu to lock into for the remainder of this match, and while the close combat does seem like the best possible move against the Wo-Chien, against the Incineroar, and then the Kyogre and the Grimmsnarl a little bit less, you will be taking defensive drops every attack you go for, and I think that's a very dangerous strategy to rely on, given how little damage Shilian is going to take from those attacks, thanks to the Tablets of Ruin and the Reflect, which are still in play.
Well, it's going to be the Terastallization from Raging Bolt. Paul has been able to maneuver 2 attackers out on the field, and including a powerful special attacker from that Raging Bolt. Of course, seeing that, Shilian will go for the Grass Terastallization on Kyogre to protect it from those electric-type attacks like a Thunderclap or a Thunderbolt from the Raging Bolt. The close combat is the choice, still dealing about 50% damage to the Wo-Chien. Really no other option for Paul if he has any hope to make it through the rest of this game. There's the Thunderbolt connecting onto the Wo-Chien as well, picks up the KO with the Terastallization, that extra damage boost getting the Snail off the field and allowing the Urshifu to deal a little bit of damage back. Now this Ice Beam, again, this is only an Assault Vest Kyogre, so it doesn't deal a lot of damage, but there is always the chance to freeze. The Ice Age has come for Raging Bolt.
That is a really unfortunate freeze there for this Raging Bolt, but I do still think that Shilian has the momentum on his side of the field. He does have to play very carefully from this point on, as, again, the Kyogre really is his best damage-dealing Pokemon at this point in time, and this close combat is going to do a significant amount of damage to that Pokemon when it does connect. Cannot connect this turn thanks to that flinch, but still, as long as you're able to remove the Raging Bolt from the field, which probably will happen next turn, judging by how much damage that Water Spout did, the Grimmsnarl should be able to come in and finish off the Urshifu with a, I believe it's the Fairy-type attack that it carries, the Spirit Break. So still in a very commanding position for Shilian, but Paul, his option here was to hope for not the freeze and then just go for more damage on that Raging Bolt, and unfortunately just did not have it in this match.
Yeah, unfortunate for Paul getting, was able to get both of those Pokemon in, but the freeze meant that the Raging Bolt was not able to deal as much damage as you may want out of that Pokemon. And of course, it all comes down to that turn 1 where Shilian was able to paralyze the Pelipper. We saw Paul trying to go for the Weather Ball, which would have picked up a 1-hit KO on the Incineroar, but instead was paralyzed, hit the Thunder Wave, lowered the speed of the Pelipper, and allowed that Incineroar to get off the Will-O-Wisp, which meant that Calyrex was not doing a lot of damage, and Shilian was able to set up, bought the time that Shilian needed.
The one thing that works out for Paul, though, is there's a very simple adjustment that you can make if you are worried about that play. You just protect your Ice Rider Calyrex, and you hope that you don't get the full paralysis after the Thunder Wave connects with your Pelipper. It is still a risk, but 2 out of 3 times you will be okay, and we did just see the 1 out of 3 times, so you would assume that probability would mean that maybe it would be better this time for you. You could also potentially make an adjustment in terms of your Pokemon, maybe try to bring the Incineroar or swap in the Raging Bolt into that spot, who wouldn't mind the burn as much as the Calyrex Ice Rider. But still, overall, I think that Shiliang's strategy of just, I'm going to set up Light Screen, or Reflect, I'm going to set up Speed Control via Thunder Wave, I'm going to switch in my Wo-Chien, just gave that Kyogre so much bulk that it was able to find the time to use those Water Spouts for that big damage, which is something that it doesn't really have the opportunity to do a lot of the time. It really does need the support of screens, of Wo-Chien, to find those opportunities.
Well, there is the support of screens on the field already in turn 1 of our game 2 here. Grimmsnarl and Incineroar, again the leads for Shiliang, and the combination Pelipper and Calyrex the leads for Paul. So a repeat of turn 1 of game 1. And we saw how that worked out for Paul last time. You have to imagine hoping for something a little bit different here. And now the obvious answer would be, something like you have the Terrestrialization. Kyogre isn't out yet. You do have the Protect as well. But the Terrestrialization is fire, and you're doing fire into a Kyogre team. And Shiliang, of course, sees that, makes the adjustments, fakes out the Pelipper to prevent that Pokemon from being able to make a move, and gets a Reflect up entirely for free.
Given the fact that Reflect will last for 8 turns, knowing that the Grimmsnarl is holding that Light Play item does give Shiliang a bit of flexibility in terms of the order that he sets all these things up in. And again, I think expecting the Ice Rider Calyrex to protect that turn was a very predictable play from Paul. Still a very safe play at the end of the day. It does give you the opportunity to see what Shiliang did and then respond.
There was no end of the game in turn 1 at that point.
Exactly. And by sending in the Raging Bolt now, you do ensure that if there is a Will-O-Wisp from that Incineroar, it will not mitigate your damage output. Even if it's a knockoff, really, you already just used your held item, so there's only so much Incineroar can do to the Raging Bolt.
Well, there is again the paralysis coming through from the Grimmsnarl, so Shiliang stalling out the turn 1 from game 1 to the turn 2 of game 2. But Paul, of course, recognizing that as a threat, and crucially, this Pelipper was not fully paralyzed, which means that this Weather Ball is able to connect with the Incineroar and pick up the one-hit KO. And that could be big, because one of the other things that ended up happening at the end of game 1 was Paul was locked into close combat, one of the only attacks on Urshifu that can actually have its damage reduced by Intimidate.
Exactly. It could be big, but there's still some different cards in play for Shiliang as well. Grimmsnarl being at full health here means that there is the opportunity for either the Light Screen or the Spirit Break this turn. I think you prioritize Light Screen because, again, the odds that this game will last 8 more turns from this point in time is very low in the Scarlet and Violet era. And then you don't have to worry about catching a potential Protect here from the Raging Bolt, but instead, Shiliang opting to try and drop the special attack via an attack. Also probably looking to do some super effective damage as well.
Yeah, one of the benefits of that Spirit Break is being able to start chipping away at this Raging Bolt, which, the burn is a stronger effect on the Calyrex, but that little bit of damage will still be chipping away at those hit points, and that plus super effective Spirit Breaks will start to add up. Which is why we're about to see a Terrestrialization hit the field here for Paul. That's going to be the Electric Raging Bolt once again.
For sure, and if there's one way you can get around the potential special attack drop from a Light Screen or a single Spirit Break, it would be this Terrestrialization paired with a Helping Hand. Normally this would be enough to pick up the KO onto this Grimmsnarl, but after this Light Screen, I think it will be able to hold on for one more turn. Let's just see how much damage this Pokemon can do.
There's the Lightning Bolt coming out from the top of the Light Bulb on the Raging Bolt. Not enough to pick up the KO like you called out, and Wo-Chien will seed the Raging Bolt. So Wo-Chien is now capable of just sitting on the field as long as that Raging Bolt is on the field. And the combination of Leech Seed plus Burn, we saw it in game 1, how much it added up on the Calyrex. Now it's doing the same thing to the Raging Bolt.
Honestly, I know that the Pelipper threatens some pretty decent damage into the Wo-Chien, but if it's able to connect a Leech Seed with Pelipper as well, I think even though it will be threatened by that super effective damage from a Hurricane, knowing the rain is about to expire and just knowing that Pelipper has a chance to be paralyzed as well, means Wo-Chien's pretty comfortable.
Yep. Yeah, this Wo-Chien is extremely happy right now. The rain has just stopped, which means that Pelipper's best way of dealing damage to it has had its accuracy drop significantly, back down to 70, I believe. And now the burn and the Leech Seed adding up on the Raging Bolt plus the Ruination means that that Pokemon is not long for this world, especially with the Kyogre now out on the field.
Kyogre will most likely have to Terrastalize this turn, as it is going to be slower than this Raging Bolt, and it will have to worry about taking super effective damage. We've already seen Paul lock into Helping Hand and the Terrastalization as well, but this time around, Helping Hand will not be able to come through thanks to that paralysis, and with no Terrastalization. Kyogre hovers just at that key point prior to a little help from its friend, where Water Spout will still do more than enough damage to pick up the KO on Raging Bolt, and potentially this Pelipper as well.
Yep, that is now a max power Water Spout. The Assault Vest coming up huge for Shilian there. Of course, Paul also missing out on the extra damage amplification from Helping Hand meant that Kyogre was over 50% health. This Kyogre is trained to be slower than the Wo-Chien so that it could get the Pollen Puff off and get the big power Water Spouts.
I love that so much. That is really borrowing from this Shadow Rider, or excuse me, Ice Rider Calyrex team, where typically you run the Amoonguss 1 or 2 speed points slower than the Calyrex, so that you are able to move first in Trick Room and heal it up. Shilian has put his own spin on this, or maybe I should say the Tang Gang put their own spin on this, giving this Wo-Chien the ability to heal up Kyogre and shore up one of its biggest weaknesses when it comes to Water Spout and when it comes to how it's